Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
All right. Hello and welcome to a new episode of I Can Do. It is the new year, 2024, January 1st. I hope and pray that you are doing well, that you are fantastic. Today has been a great day for me. I'm recording this in the evening time of this day of Monday, January 1st, 2024. Excited about the future, and I hope and pray that you are excited about the future as well. As we embark upon a new year, first, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all of those who are listening to this podcast in America, and thank you for everyone listening to the podcast all around the world for that matter as well. We've been able to have been heard. This podcast has been heard in numerous countries since the launch of it back in November of 2019. I know that we've had some new people who have followed the I Can Do podcast, and so I want to just tell you a little bit about myself and how this podcast came to be and how this might encourage you to reach further than maybe you're a little comfortable doing. Back in 2018, I guess, I had bought a microphone, but I didn't really do too much with it. My wife and I, we had been a guest in another podcast a couple of times in 2019. I finally had the courage to make my own podcast. There was some fear involved with that. Would it be successful? Would it not be successful? That microphone was just sitting in my closet for about a year, and I finally decided to take action. I'm really excited and happy that I did. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts that are out there, and many podcasts are unique. Some are really, really big. Some are really, really small. But there's always a why behind them. And my why was initially the fear of, let me see if I can prove to myself that I can actually do this. Now, it can be very easy to get stuck in the comparison game, to get stuck in this podcast is way bigger than my podcast, or they have more guests on this show than I do. Why aren't people sharing my podcast like they're doing with others and things like that? Full disclosure, I've had those thoughts. I've had those feelings as well. But as I have gotten older and really have started thinking a lot more about what I've been able to do with the podcast, thank the Lord, I'm starting to see and really, I guess, have more appreciation with what I've been able to do with the I Can Do podcast. And I will say even most recently, reading a book by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy, a book called The Gap and the Gain, really has helped me out with this. It is very easy to stay in what's called the gap. And my understanding of what this gap is, we're really talking about mindset. We're talking about getting into this particular thought process or even an evaluation process where you don't see any progress. You don't see any gains. You're complaining. You're upset. You're measuring things the wrong way. Even the success that you have had, you don't even really view it as much of a success. Now, part of that, of what they say about this idea of the gap in the book, is that many times we set ourselves up to fall into this gap. So, for example, we can have this ideal situation or thought of, okay, this is exactly where I want to be. Right? The ideal, perfect situation. They compare that to like the horizon. Now, the challenge with that, though, is that the ideal, it keeps moving forward. It keeps moving forward. So when you're not at that point, when you're not hitting it, well, you're not satisfied as much about all the great progress that you actually have had. So one of the things that they talk about in this book that I want to share with you as you go into the new year that has really helped me already is how we measure success, number one. And number two, always measure backwards. AMB, always measure backwards. They emphasize this point because when you take time to look back, whether it's on a daily process a weekly process, a monthly process, 90 days, or even a year back, well, you will inevitably, if you're doing work and being wise with your time and things like that, you're going to see progression. Now, it may not be exactly where you want to be, but that's really where the gap is where that can happen, where we can start falling into the gap and miss out on the excellent progression and steps that have been taken. I know this to be true because I've seen it before with weight loss, the podcast, where you have this expectation, okay, I'm going to be here by such and such a date. And then when you don't get there, maybe you're here, or maybe you're just a little bit away. Well, you're not happy. You're not content. So measuring backwards is a way to really stay in what's called the gain, this mindset of the gains, where you are seeing progress, you are seeing results, and you see you are moving forward. That changes everything when it comes to how you feel about what you're doing and exactly where you're going. So this requires taking some steps back and setting up some kind of system where you can evaluate these gains. One of the things they talk about in this book that I really have appreciated, and I used to do this with when I was working out with Bill Phillips back in 2016 and 2017. He had a journal, a 30-day journal, and there were certain prompts on this journal. You can do it in a notebook. I use the Full Focus Journal now by Michael Hyatt, which I love. Actually, it's not a journal, it's a planner. I've been using that for a number of years. But one of the things they talked about in the book, The Gap and the Gain, is to measure your wins daily. So they recommend having 3 things you're going after for the day that when you accomplish them, that is what's called a win. All right. Maybe that could be getting your workout in. Maybe that's doing some kind of good deed. Maybe it's reading 10 pages in a book. You get to decide what those wins are. If you're an entrepreneur, maybe it's you did something to help move your company forward. Whatever kind of job or career that you have or may not have, there's always something that you can do to identify, okay, what might be 3 ways that I can win today? And what Dan Sullivan talks about in this book is, and I've been listening to it via Audible app, which I really love because you get to hear Dan and Ben talk. What he mentions here is, okay, well, at the end of every week, you've had 21 wins, and record these so you can see them. Well, at the end of the month, you're close to about 100 wins. So you are putting yourself in a position of momentum. You're putting yourself in a position of success where you can see tangible things that you're doing or accomplishing. And so that is something that is so important, no matter what the situation may be. I think it's really important for all of us as we move into 2024. Sometimes we can say, you know what, last year was just a really terrible year. In some respects, that could be true for some people. But you can find yourself in the gap if you're only focused on what is bad or what is wrong or what you don't have or where you are currently not at this point in time. The better alternative is to focus on the gains. Where are you currently? Look back from last week, last month, last January. That's a great exercise. So I'll give you an example of this. Last January, when I got on the scale, I was shocked with the number that I saw. And that's my fault because I became undisciplined last fall. And it was a number that I don't think I've ever seen before. And if I have, I was not weighing when I was at that number. So I was very frustrated. It was January 8th. So 2022, thank the Lord, I've lost about 25, 26 pounds. Moving into the year, I have January 8th written on, or focused. That's a day I'm focused upon because I want to get back on the scale and I know I'm not going to be at that number. And so you can look back a year ago to see where you were, and I can look back now and see, I've made a lot of gains in the last 12 months. Something else that is important as you think about this, as you move into 2024, is also, this is about you. It's about me. So my progress is not your progress and vice versa. This is not a competition with someone else. So you focus on your gains, focus on staying out of the gap. And we can get into the gap really, really fast if you think about it. We can shift the thinking and only see what we don't have, where we're not, how far off we are from the ideal situation, whatever the case may be. So I hope this helps you with 2024. And I would encourage you to read the book, The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan. He's the owner, one of the owners of Strategic Coaching. I've never met him before. I saw one of his books back in 2017 when I was at Bill Phillips' camp. And the title really caught my attention. The title was called Make Your Future Bigger Than Your Past. Let that sink in. Make your future bigger than your past. Well, how do you do that? You got to measure some things. You can't live in the gap. Rather, you have to live in the gain. And so that's how we can make our future greater than our past. So take these things, ponder them, think about them. You can read the transcript as well and see how might this help you in 2024. I'm going to talk more about this because I'm studying this book and I've already listened to it once. I want to go back and I want to listen to it a few more times as well because it's already made a major shift for me. And I'll give you another example here of just talking to a family member, how this was able to help her out. It can be very easy to look at our careers and jobs and to not always be satisfied with them, to have something to complain about with respect to the job that we may have. And it is true at times you're going to have to make some kind of adjustment and move forward. You know, when I was in college, I was working at a Gold's Gym. I knew I didn't want to stay there forever. I had the opportunity to go and work with Pfizer. And so I was able to do that for 8 years. And then I made the transition into preaching full time. And I've been able to do that for the past 15 years. But I also started the podcast in 2019 and blogging in 2016, 2017, and doing some other things as well. So there's always something good to look at. But talking to one of my family members, I asked her, how much time off do you get with your current job? And so we started going down this path. And I said, well, do you get the weekends off? And she said, yes. I said, well, think about that. That's 104 days off, automatically off the calendar. Well, I don't know if the weekends really count. No, they do, because if you don't have any paperwork, phone calls, text messages, those are 2 complete days. You don't have any work. So that's 104 days. I asked her, do you get certain holidays off? She said, yes. That's another 10, 11, 12 days. And I said, well, how much time off do you get, or PTO time? So she shared that with me. When she got done, she mentioned, and you can see what some coaches call the one insight moment. Her whole mindset shifted because she has been focused on what she doesn't have with this job. But then she started thinking about it, and she's like, wait a second. I actually have a pretty good situation here because I have so much time off, and now there's a deeper appreciation. So she moved from the gap to the gain. Something as simple as that can change how we work, how we go to work, how we do our jobs. Understanding, appreciating, measuring, and saying, wait a second, I really do have it pretty good here. So that's an example of how the gain will really change your life. It can help your life and your perspective and where you're headed to be that much more enjoyable and exciting as well. So I hope this helps. As you move into 2024, focus on the gains, stay out of the gap, and take some time to appreciate the blessings that you have. That will go a long way. One last thought, and then I'll wrap it up. I got some more data with my podcast, and my most popular podcast episode last year was actually episode number 80, and it was called I Recommend Body for Life by Bill Phillips. I've given a number of book reviews, and if you go back to podcast episode number 80, well, that's my most popular podcast, as new people have been listening to this podcast, finding this. Thank you so much for sharing it and learning to have more of an I can do mindset. And so I'll talk more about my story. I shared a little bit earlier at the beginning of how I got started with the podcast. I'd like to share more with you about where I can do came from, what that actually means, and what that actually can mean for you. And we'll talk more about that in future episodes. I can do, so can you. Take care and God bless. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you are in the need or looking for more motivation in your life, feel free to check out my website, benjaminlee.blog, where you can find hundreds of encouraging, motivational blog posts on a variety of subjects. You can find all of my books, which can also be found on Amazon.com, and other podcast interviews with a variety of people. I hope this helps. Please leave me a rating and a review. I can do, and so can you. Take care, and God bless.